But I knew if I chose Klakwan, I'd be violating our cultural protocol, because the only time I would go back to Klakwan was when I died. I would be buried back in my own clan. So I called my 3 kids together and I said, well, we have to make a decision about where we're going to enroll. And so I tried to explain ANCSA to them and about enrollment. They were just little munchkins. And they said, Mom, where are you going to enroll? And I said, well, I've decided to enroll in Klakwan. And they said, we will too, Mama, we will too. So we all enrolled in Klakwan. And in terms of financial benefits, it turned out to be the best decision for us. Because I think we have probably distributed over $1 million to each of our shareholders. Whereas my brothers and sisters enrolled into Juneau, and they received just a fraction of that. But then I live in Juneau, but I'm not engaged politically, you know, in that corporation.
Were there, when this enrollment happened, were there the kind of problems that happened like with the historical enrollments of people not enrolling?
Oh yes, yes, we had. We had a lot of people in the military. We had people living, you know, all over the world. They did not enroll. So, but we'll come to that.
So, what was the implication of what you just described to the traditional lineage?
Yeah. Well, it meant that I violated, you know, I could have lived there, and if I were, you know, if I didn't get married, I could have gone back there to live. And actually my grandmother went back to Klakwan to live after my grandfather died. My grandfather was from Haines, and he's a Sukakadi, Sakai Salmon clan. So she chose not to marry after he died. And when, remember I told you that there were still these younger, older marriages? Remember I told you about Nathan Jackson? And how he almost married his uncle's wife, but he just decided, I just can't do it. You know, I don't know if he'll tell you that story.
Yeah.
But he decided not to marry. Well, a woman can also make that decision. And I was actually in Ku'ich, potlatch in Huna, and the woman, her husband had died, and he was a clan leader of the Chickanaidin. And in this party in 1968, I saw several young men stand up, and each of them offered to marry her. And she said, she didn't say anything. She just, you know, and I could still see her sitting there, and she didn't respond to any of the offers of marriage. And what she was saying, she would be a widow forever. You know. So anyway, so I went ahead and I enrolled to Klakwan. And because I didn't live in Klakwan, a lot of people didn't know who I was. And somebody, the enrollment officer there in Klakwan, challenged my enrollment. And all I did was I went and put my genealogy, sent them my genealogy, and I could go back 10 generations, and where I know, you know, all of my ancestors. And they looked at it and they said, oh yes, you know, it was very clear that I was from the Thunderbird House in Klakwan. So I don't live there. I'm not engaged in the politics of Klakwan because the people didn't view me really as being from Klakwan. And my sons and my daughter, who are highly educated, my son is the CEO of one of the largest corporations in this state. He could, if he ran for office, he could not get elected, just because he's not from that village. Although he is from that village, but didn't live there.
So who had the insight for the people in Klakwan to file to ask for land in addition to their reserve? Who personally undertook that aggressive act?
Oh, okay. You know who did? Those of us who didn't live there.
You did.
Yeah. I and others. You know, because we don't live in Klakwan. We had this reserve, but we would not benefit from the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. So that's why we went to Congress to ask for the extra 23,000 acres. So we have really the best of both worlds. And if I choose to go back to Cluck 1, I can. Now I have the right to do that. And it's just, very complicated and a lot of changes, and, we're still trying to figure out, what do all these changes mean.
Does each corporation invest in various business enterprises? So then aren't you sort of dependent, you being any person who is native from Alaska, is sort of dependent on this group at the head of the corporation to do a good job business-wise?
Sounds like a campaign speech. Yeah. Actually, you have a board of directors.
That sounds
and
awful.
their board of directors make that decision.
Sounds awful.
Well, it's just like any other corporation. You have a board of
Biden
directors.
corporate model.
Yeah, and you elect your board of directors. Okay, but let's go on. Come on, let's go on. I want to tell you some more about ANCSA Corporation. So anyway, we have more than 78,000 Alaska Natives who were initially enrolled as shareholders. But I want to go through some of the issues associated with ANCSA. Okay, we were looking at this as a land claim settlement, but we weren't thinking about, everything else like subsistence. And subsistence is hunting and fishing, traditional subsistence hunting and fishing. We weren't thinking about that. But, actually, William Paul, asked, just as the leaders were negotiating on this ANCSA settlement, at AFN, what should we do? And William Paul says, what about subsistence, hunting and fishing? It says that hunting and fishing rights are going to be extinguished. Your Aboriginal hunting and fishing rights are going to be extinguished. That's what the law says. Although in the congressional hearing, it was very clear that Congress wanted to protect hunting and fishing, but they did not want to do it as part of this act. And so they delegate to the Secretary of Interior the mechanisms to protect hunting and fishing. So when William Paul raises this, Emil Noddy is the chair. And he said, oh man, if we raise this issue now, it's going to stop the whole, political process, and we are not going to get ANCSA adopted. And he knew, politically that the time was right, for us to settle the land claims. And, we had all the oil company support, and he said if we stopped it, we probably, would not be able to get this law through. So they decided not to pursue, inclusion of hunting and fishing rights in ANCSA itself. And at the time, there had been only one study that I was aware of. An economist by the name of Jake Nakamoto had tried to quantify the value of subsistence hunting and fishing. And it was, it was very significant. His study was from western Alaska, northwestern Alaska.
What was his name?
Jake Akamoto. Jake Akamoto, an economist. The only one that I know that did a study on the economic value of subsistence hunting and fishing. So anyway, we know that in the conference committee report, it's really clear that Congress intended for subsistence hunting and fishing to be protected, and they left it to the Secretary of Interior and to the state of Alaska to protect subsistence. But the Secretary of Interior failed to initiate any action to protect subsistence, and so therefore Native people went back to Congress, and when the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act was being discussed, they put in their provisions to require a subsistence priority for rural Alaska. And this is where rural first emerges. And this was, the Native people were, having this issue with the state of Alaska. The state of Alaska did not want to include Alaska Natives. So the compromise turned out to be rural Alaska. A major mistake, in my opinion. And, you know, I'll tell you that I've chaired the AFM Subsistence Committee for 10 years. I've now recently been reappointed. And I think what happened, from my perspective, what happened was that our people just did not understand, you know, the legalese at the time. And so I refuse to move anything until, you know, we understand, you know, the full implications. So anyway, ANILCA does require this, the protection of a subsistence priority for rural residents. Just to go on with this issue, under the Constitution, the state Constitution, the state has the right to manage fish and game. But in the Constitution, it also says that they will have, you know, protected for all citizens. So there'll be equal, supposedly equal protection for everybody. And so the state of Alaska said they could not comply with a rural priority. And so what ultimately happens is that under ANILCA, if the state does not provide for a subsistence priority or subsistence protection, the federal government would then take back management of fish and game on federal land. So that is what is going on today. We have a dual management regime. We have management by the feds on federal lands, and we have the state management on state lands and private land, including Native corporations. So this is a major issue right now before the Native community. We just had a preliminary briefing by someone from the Secretary of Interior on efforts to try to clean up or make, you know, fix subsistence. We have gone to DC many times, and we've said subsistence is broken. Subsistence is broken. The protections are not there. Our people, you know, are suffering the consequences of this lack of protection, and we need to do something about it. And so at this last Alaska Federation of Natives Convention in October, the Secretary of Interior makes the promise that he's going to fix subsistence. But now we're being told he's busy with the Gulf of Alaska.
Yeah, who ultimately decides what subsistence is, and more specifically, what sort of technology can be used? Is that a pretty contentious issue?
Oh yes, oh yes.
Is that up to the government then?
We have a federal subsistence board that's
Okay.
now deciding that on federal land.
Is there any Native representation on the board?
We have 2 representatives on 7 or 9 member board. I can't
Okay.
remember. But so yeah.
So I'm a little confused too about if it's considered state land, not federal land, the federal government is still, if the state is non-compliant with the ANILCA, then the federal government is subsuming those.
They take over
responsibilities?
management on federal lands,
Only federal.
only federal lands. The state manages on state land 103 million acres, plus ANCSA's 44 million acres. So we have a dual management regime. So you could have a guy chasing a moose, or a
Does it
caribou.
stop at the border?
Stop at the border, and there's different laws apply. You know?
But they're not, they're still.
I mean, this is what they say. This is what the hunters are telling us. You know?
But they're still not, it's still not with, I mean, as far as what Charlie is saying, just bringing that into another realm, the definition for subsistence is different for you, right, than it is for the federal government.
Oh yeah,
and-
we're still arguing about what customary and traditional is.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and we're still arguing about what is rural. And we have a village right here, Saxman. You've been visiting a Saxman. Saxman is a native village. They're a group of people that move from a southern village, and then moved to Saxman, their village. They thought they had witchcraft there, and people were dying. So they left and they settled at Saxman. They still maintain, they're still a cohesive unit. They have their own traditions. You'll see their park there, what they do there. They're still a cohesive, functioning entity. But what's happened is we've had urban sprawl, and so the Federal Subsistence Board has said they are no longer rural, and so they cannot have subsistence protection as rural residents. And, I've said they should not be penalized because of urban sprawl. They still are, a functioning unit of Tlingit people who still share food, who still take care of their elders, who still feed their ancestors, who still, have traditional foods in their ceremony. It's still important to them. But the Subsistence Board has ruled that they're no longer rural. So we've asked the Secretary of Interior to hold off. It'll take effect in another year. We've asked the Secretary to put a moratorium on all of those determinations by the Federal Subsistence Board. They make that determination.
And you're saying that the definitions of rural are, can be very different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've gone through all kinds of, ways of trying to define subsistence and define rural. And it's still, it's very problematic. Our people have a cultural attachment to subsistence, plus it still is important for economic reasons.
And one more, the Federal Subsistence Board is again appointed.
Yes,
Not
yeah,
some-
yeah, it's comprised of federal employees who are responsible for management of lands. They shouldn't be on there, in my opinion. It should be a policy board, not managers. That's the way it works. So anyway, we're asking for, the Secretary to look at that. We want a major overhaul. We don't want just tinkering, with the system. We think the system it was meant to be just a temporary system because the assumption was always that the state would come into compliance with ANILCA and thereby resume management on federal lands. But we have now come to the conclusion that the state will not comply with ANILCA. We tried to get a constitutional amendment so it would recognize a subsistence priority. But we came within one vote at the legislature, and you have to have 2/3 of the legislature have to approve a resolution that would then be brought to the citizens. And we could not get that resolution out of the legislature. And but we had done surveys that showed that the public supported a subsistence priority, but we could not get it through this ultra-conservative legislature. And we got to thinking, gosh, why are we fighting for it? Why is the Alaska Federation of Natives fighting for it? We were the ones pushing the constitutional amendment. We were saying, we need to fix this dual management regime. And after we figured that out, we quit trying to get a constitutional amendment. So nobody else is doing that. So, we're protected, under, well, we thought we were protected under federal subsistence. It's still, it's still a better system than the state system. But the state did, I'm spending a lot of time on subsistence. The state did develop an MOU with the Subsistence Board. And from our perspective, they have a lot of influence at the Federal Subsistence Board. And we want the Secretary to get rid of that MOU with the state and the control that they have at the state. So anyway, that's subsistence. Let's get back to ANGSA. Okay, this is what ANGSA didn't take care of with subsistence. We should have taken care of that. We should have listened to Mr. Akamoto and William Paul. We didn't do that. So I'm off to DC July 14th to meet with the White House, try to put some pressure on the secretary to try to do something with the subsistence system. Okay, so anyway, there's this other aspect of ANGSA, and I don't know where this came from. I'm still researching this, and this section 7I says that regional corporations are to share 70% of their profits from any kind of mineral development, subsurface development, or timber development. We are required to share 70% of our profits. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Ever heard of a corporation sharing with other corporations? When I told someone from Wall Street who was, I don't know what they called him an emeritus or something, and I was having dinner at one of the board meetings for the Indian Museum, and he just said, "My dear, that is so un-American. We really need to do something about that."
Yeah, change their corporations to do that.
Anyway, but okay, who imposed this? I don't know. One of the reports that I'm reading now suggested it actually came from us, you know, and so I'm still doing more research on that. I like to study ANGSA. I just think it's such a great, you know, fascinating, you know, thing that we're trying to do here in Alaska. Let's get on to that part. So anyway, we are required to do that. Then it goes through that formula where it's shared with the village. We get to keep 50%, and then the regional corporations get to keep 50% after the total distribution. And then it goes to the village corporation, and then it goes to individuals. Okay, let's take a look at how does this actually work. Really complex. And I will tell you.
Maybe have a short break.
Oh, okay, all right, good idea.